Hello and welcome to today's video. Now, over the years, I have made a lot of different versions of Groot. I've loved Groot since his first appearance in Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't recall him much in the comics before that, but I know he's been around for a while. But there was one version, or variation of a version, that I haven't tackled yet. And a while back, I saw some fan art that had little potted Groot, and he was making a heart with his tree limbs, because Groot's limbs, could change size and everything. They can be different lengths, and the artist brought those limbs, arms up and around, and made a little heart shape. So it's kind of an "I love you, Groot." So in today's video, I'm going to make an "I love you, Groot" out of polymer clay. The first thing I'm going to do is cut 3 pieces of wire. The center wire will be for his body and where I attach his head. The other 2 wires will wrap around that center wire, and I'll use it for each one of his arms. And you can see here, I've got the wire bent at the bottom there. That's going to make kind of a foot, so I'll have 3 feet for this sculpture to stand while I'm making it, and also while it's baking. Once it is baked, I'll bend those wires down, trim them off, and use them to insert Groot into the pot. So I'm just going to twist all 3 wires together, and then I'm going to make sure I have the heart shape how I want. Now, the reason why I'm using wires for this is I want his arms to stay in that heart position. Now, I could bake him flat, but I've had occasions where I've done things like that, and then once you put it upright and it stays standing up for a while, it will droop. That clay will actually bend over time. And this way, by using a thicker gauge wire, I shouldn't have that issue, and he should keep his form for his, lifetime. I don't know what that is, but, hopefully that works. So now that I've got the wire how I want it for the body, I'm going to bulk up the base of it, the trunk area, just to make it a little bit thicker than what the wire was. Now that I'm happy with how that looks, I'm going to go ahead and soften up some of my raw sienna clay. So I'm using Primo Sculpey here, and that's their variation of brown. So I'm just going to get it nice and soft, and then once I can get it fairly soft, I'm going to go ahead and tear off some pieces and start bulking up or building up his body. So I did put some underneath, and now I'm just going to go around his body area with some more raw sienna clay. So what I want to do is I want to cover the foil completely. So I just need to soften up a little bit more to get the rest of his body covered, and then I can start working on his arms. So I'm just going to go ahead and soften this up and put it over the top there. Get it nice and smooth in with the rest of it. And then I went ahead and added some to where, it would be kind of like a neck area, because I didn't want his head to start right where his arms came out. I wanted to give him, a little bit of a space there. So now I've rolled out a section of the raw sienna into a snake. I went ahead and cut it down the middle so I could apply it over the wire. Even doing so, it was a pretty small piece, and so I really had to smooth it in and fill in some gaps with some other clay. But, it wasn't too hard to do. It just took a little bit of time. Main thing is I just wanted to make sure that wire was completely covered so it didn't show through in the final sculpture. Then I did add some texture to the body, but I want to go ahead and give him a little bit of a twist in his body, because he doesn't have, he's not like a humanoid character. He has more flow to him, and he dances around a lot. So I wanted to give him a little bit of a twist to it. And now I'm going to go ahead and add some texture. Even though I'm going to cover up most of his body, I wanted that texture there in case any of it showed through. So now what I'm going to do is make some different shades of brown. So I wanted to get a few different shades. So I'm making some lighter brown by adding some white Primo Sculpey. And then I also even took some black in there to make it a little bit, a different shade that was a little bit darker than that. And then I'm going to mix all 3 of these together, and I just cut off some pieces that I'm going to use for the vines. Now when I mix these, I don't want to mix them all the way because that's just going to make another shade, and I want it to have some swirls to it like there. Now that I'm happy with how the brown looks, I'm going to go ahead and roll it out into vines. So I want it to be fairly thin at the end of the vine, but at the base I want it to be thicker so I can press it against his body. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it all the way around his body and up around his arms or limbs. I'm going to do this several times, kind of alternating between his two different arms. So I just bring it around. And one thing I want to make sure to do is I don't want it to look too uniform or too, like manufactured, if that makes sense. I don't want it to be perfect. I want them to overlap and kind of as if they grew in a little bit different directions, maybe at a different rate, so there's different lengths to them. If you look at vines in nature that go up buildings and stuff, there are different lengths and some will go in different ways. I know lots of times things will grow where the sun's at, but Groot's a moving creature, and even potted he probably gets moved around a lot, so his growth probably isn't determined by that as much as a stationary plant. So these are all kind of things I think about as I'm making, different sculptures, depending on what the source material is. So once I was happy with his vines, I'm going to go through and add a little bit of a texture to them, add some little creases, little, not really cracks, but I just want him to have some crevices in there to add a little more detail to him. And I'll also go back through his body for any place that I might have smoothed out by handling it. Now I want to go ahead and make Groot's head. So I'm just rolled out a piece of foil. I didn't want to make it too big so it would, touch those hands or, hand area that was coming down. Now I'm going to use a dark piece of clay for the top of his head, and then a little bit lighter mixture. It's kind of mixed with some of the other colors, other shades of brown, to go around for his main part of his head. So I'm just kind of want to give him a little bit of a indented area for the back of his head, and then I want to go and use a ball tool to add some texture there. It kind of reminds me of like a broken off tree limb that's fallen and it's kind of decayed a little bit, and it has a little bit of a rough texture to it. Then once I get it attached to the head, or the head attached to the body, I'm going to go ahead and add some texture with my needle tool. And I'm just going around dragging the tool across and getting some detail in there. Now I want to add some detail to the top of his head. So I'm just using an X-Acto knife to cut little notches in there to kind of give him a little more detail, make it a little more rough. And then I'm going to use my ball tool here to add some eye sockets and my needle tool to do a little smiley face. Because if it's an I love you Groot, he's got to be happy. So I'm just going to go through, add a couple little more pieces of detail, cut out some clay for the notches, go through, add some more texture. You'll be able to see that texture in the final video, or the final segment of this video, so you can get a really good look at what this does, when you add those details with the needle tool and X-Acto knife. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and wash my hands, and then I'll get back to him. I'm going to switch over to the black clay. And I'm just going to soften up this black clay and roll it out into a couple little, almost like ovals. I'm not using necessarily a ball shape, but kind of an oval shape. And I'm going to press those into the indentions. I didn't quite have the shape right the first time, so I just trying again. Getting those pressed in there. And then now, I think I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to wash my hands again because I'm going to work with white. And it's very important when you work with white to get those hands nice and clean so you don't have any of that pigment transfer onto the white clay. Now with the white, I'm just going to do a couple little spots on each eye. So I'm going to do these really small. I got it zoomed in here, but I know it's still pretty tiny to see there. And so I'm doing two bigger ones that'll go on the top, and then two smaller ones that'll go down below. Now these white spots are supposed to represent where the light reflects. I am going to gloss his eyes, but I want him to have a more cartoony look, so I went ahead and added those with the white clay. Now the last thing I'm going to do is add some green leaves. I thought with all the brown, this guy needed a little bit of color on him. So I'm just going to make a few teardrop shaped leaves, add a little bit of texture to them, and then attach him in some various spots. I don't really have a rhyme or reason. I just kind of placed them and wanted to put them where they would be noticeable. I didn't necessarily put them behind, and one thing about sculptures, you have to, unless it's a wall hanging, you have to sculpt the whole thing, but you kind of have the front or kind of a side view that is going to be your main viewing point for it. And so that's where I usually put a little more detail into it. So I'm going to go ahead and wash my hands one more time because I wasn't happy with where the little light reflections were on his eyes. And so I'm just adjusting them slightly. And with that done, I can just touch up a few of his details. Just want to add a few more little marks and lines, and then I can go ahead and bake him according to package instructions. So I let Groot cool for a while. Now I'm going to add some gloss coat over his eyes. So I'm just using some Sculpted gloss, mixed it up. I did have one small brush, but it wasn't quite small enough, so I got me one with a little smaller tip to it. And I'm going to add a light gloss coat over his eyes. I don't want to goop it on too much. I just want to make sure they're completely covered. And what this does, I think it adds a nice contrast between, the glossy eyes and the rest of him that kind of has a matte finish, has that baked clay finish that's a little bit different, obviously than adding a gloss coat or a satin gloss coat. And by doing this, I think, it makes those eyes kind of pop out more. And it just, it's a fun contrast between the two. I always like doing stuff like this or working, with different mediums in the same sculpture, kind of like, using the pot and stuff with this to make it a little bit different instead of making his pot out of clay. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill this little flower pot with some foam. So I have this, kind of craft foam, or I think it's 4 flower pots, I think, for like fake flowers. I don't know. Anyway, I've had it for a long time, and I'm just going to fill up this little flower pot. I'm going to squish all that foam in there to get it nice and tight. And now that that's done, I'm going to bend his wires down, and then I'm going to trim them so they're not too long. I did a test thing, and one of the wires is still too long, so I'm going to trim those down a little bit more, and then I'm going to get him in place. Once I'm happy with his placement, I'm going to take some of this moss and fill it in there. And I think it adds a neat look to it and makes it a little more, unique. And it's kind of fun because that moss, kind of goes all over, and it just makes him look a little more organic, which Groot should look. All right, now that he's all done, I'm going to go ahead and let him dry overnight. So here is the finished I Love You Groot. I'm really happy how this guy turned out. It's definitely how I envisioned with, the heart shape. And you can see here he's just over 8 inches tall. We're going to flip that over. It looks like he's about 20.5 centimeters tall. So he's a pretty good size figurine, but he didn't take a lot of material because he's thin and his arms are thin. But he was definitely a fun little project to do. And I'm glad I finally got to him. And I'll still do some other Groots, but this was the one that, was always kind of on my to-do list ever since I saw that artist picture of him doing the little heart with his arms. And here you can see a close-up, and you can see all that texture in his head that I added to the bark. And you can go around here and you can see, especially right here at the base, you can see those grooves in there. And I think it adds a nice, wood look to the clay. And you can see the different shades in there. So I'm really happy how he turned out. And I like the way that one vine kind of went up around his head, and that was just purely by accident. When I attached the head, it did that. And you can see how different the arms are, how those vines are wrapped around differently. And you'll see here a lot of that moss kind of just comes out. And I like that look. I think it's makes it, a more interesting piece visually. It's not symmetrical, and it shouldn't be. So I'm really happy how this guy turned out. And so I thought it would be fun to do this guy the week of Valentine's Day. So if anybody wanted to make one of these for someone they cared about, I think it would be a fun project. You could even carve, like initials into it, like people have done into trees, but you could do that into the base, maybe one of the thicker areas. I think that would be a fun, personalized touch. Got some of this moss coming out. It does get kind of messy. It is, a little bit of a pain to clean up, but I think it's fun to do with the potted ones instead of just doing dirt or gravel or something. All right, well, thank you so much for watching today's video. And remember, never stop creating. Bye!